We talked on yesterday or last week's show, a couple different shows, about the Brittany Griner prisoner swap and how there was quite the criticism from the right wing. And one of the things I said in the initial story about all this was that there really is a lot to consider, a lot of complexities in these negotiations, and it's almost hard to know what things were being weighed and whether or not every little aspect of it happened perfect if you're not in those rooms. But from what we saw, the criticism that was happening, right, from what we knew about this negotiation, I did not understand what the right-wing criticism was all about, except for kind of dishonesty, trying to get jabs in to political opponents. And so that has been further expanded on from some recent events in the political world that I want to tell you about. First, let me kind of lay the groundwork for anyone who's not caught up on this. So Brittany Griner, WNBA star, got wrongfully detained for having a tiny little amount of CBD or marijuana or something like that. Some marijuana product, and the Biden administration was able to get her back. Paul Whalen is another U.S. citizen being held wrongfully in Russia, but his charges are much more severe that the Russian government is putting on, and all of these things. And what was able to get negotiated in this moment was, okay, we can get Brittany Griner back. Russia's not being reasonable on Paul Whalen, so we're not able to get him back at this time. It wasn't, as the right wing is making out to be, because they just hated Paul Whalen and loved Brittany Griner. Not so much. But before we dive into the new elements of this, they're just fascinating. Let's remind ourselves about what this criticism looked like.
So at this point, we can assume the obvious. The Biden administration chose Brittany Griner over Paul Whalen, the basketball player over the Marine facing 16 years. There was only room for one, the lifeboat, and the Marine got left behind. Well, why'd they make that choice? Well, you should know that Whalen is a Trump voter, and he made the mistake of saying so on social media. He's paying the price for that now. Brittany Griner is not. She's got very different politics. Brittany Griner despises the United States. She's been very vocal about that.
Okay, and then that's another element. They have obsessed over her not agreeing with them politically and saying that, I guess, her criticizing her own country, a place where that's supposed to be something we have the right to do, is a reason why she shouldn't be brought home or something. I don't know. Very strange. But here's another example of this right-wing criticism.
Take a look at the other things, though, he has going against him in the court of public opinion here. Paul Whalen, he's straight, he's white, and he's a man. And also, this is key, he's not famous. That's bad for him.
I mean, just how vile. Trying to make it seem that Biden chose not to bring Paul Whalen back as if he had the choice, which we know now he didn't. It's Russia that's being irrational. They're the reason why Paul Whalen is not coming back. But is because Paul Whalen is a straight white male? Really? Really, that's what you're going to go with? Come on. Okay, well, here's the new element of it. People who used to work in the Trump administration have come out and revealed that the Trump administration actually had an option to get Paul Whalen back that they weren't interested in. And that option was Victor Bout for Paul Whalen and maybe some other variables involved, but there was actually a better chance at that moment, and they weren't interested. And so for people who didn't criticize that at the time, or won't even criticize that now, to come out and pretend Biden's evil for at least getting one American back when Russia wasn't allowing the other is strange. So here's this being discussed with a former Trump administration official, Fiona Hill, on Face the Nation.
Former colleague, John Bolton, I think your former boss, right, on the National Security Council, told one of my colleagues at CBS that the possibility of a boot for Whalen trade existed back then, and it wasn't made for very good reasons, having to deal with Victor Bout. Do you recall a potential prisoner swap with Russia?
Yes, I do recall that. That was raised many times by the Russians, that they wanted Victor Bout. And at the time, there was also the drug smuggler, Yaroshenko, who was ultimately swapped for Trevor Reed, the other former Marine.
Okay. So I'm listening. Is anyone going to come out and say Trump's also evil for that, when actually you would have to say he's more evil when he actually had a chance, whereas Biden at this point is not negotiating with the Russian side, who's interested in actually giving reasonable conditions. And then here's another former Trump advisor saying that ultimately this was the correct decision, and the Biden administration is definitely likely working to get Paul Whalen back as well.
First of all, I'll just say congratulations to Roger Carstens, who's just on here, in the Biden administration for the good work they did. None of this is very easy. The American people think it's it's an either or. They had a choice. They don't have a choice. You have to negotiate with the Russians. So think about Putin sitting across the table, and Vladimir Putin doesn't give you a choice. He said, you can have this or you can have nothing. So it wasn't you could have Paul Whalen. Listen, we'd love to have Paul Whalen home. I know his family would. I know Roger Carson's would. I know the Biden administration would like to have Paul Whalen home. And they're going to get him home. But at this point in time, they just couldn't get it done. And it's very difficult to do. It's not simply, we don't want we don't want Brittany right now. We want Paul. That wasn't even on the table.
Right. Which is exactly what we were talking about last week. And then finally, Paul Whelan's brother coming out and saying that the Trump administration wasn't either as able or as interested in pursuing this type of trade, whereas the Biden administration is much more engaged.
It's really been an evolution, and I think the first 2 years, partly I think the Trump administration was not prepared to or not interested in working on wrongful detention cases, and partly the tools didn't exist during those first 2 years of Paul's detention. We're starting to see that change. The Biden administration is much more engaged in wrongful detentions, and the executive order that President Biden passed or signed last year, plus the Levinson Act, have given the government more tools to help wrongful detainee families, but also to try to start to punish the nations who are doing this. So,
yep. So, I mean, as we talked about initially last week with this, it's all very complex. These types of negotiations are so multifaceted. But to come out and pretend that this was a matter of Biden choosing Brittany Griner because he hates the U.S. Marine and loves the WNBA star and all of these things is just deeply dishonest, and that absolutely needs to be called out.